name is Tennyson Stead. This is the Eight-Sided Blog. This week I'd like to talk about having a battle plan for when you encounter abuses of power. One of the biggest challenges that, a person faces in this industry is what to do when people around them start overstepping boundaries and complicating relationships by leveraging power in unethical ways. And it's a complicated issue for a lot of people because, there's power relationships in this industry which dictate our success in the first case. And in the second case, it's really extremely challenging to succeed in entertainment. And we want to give one another a little bit of grace now and again because we're going to need that grace ourselves. We try to create room to fudge things. We do it unconsciously, but it's a natural impulse. And it's something I choose to fight in my own work. I create basically a very hardline procedure for dealing with abuses of power that I use unrelentingly. And it's not necessarily combative all the time, but it is rigid and it keeps me ethically safe and it keeps me physically safe, and I'm going to share it with you now. The first thing for me when I see somebody doing something wrong is a safety check. I want to make sure that anybody who is potentially harmed by the wrongdoing is aware of what's going on and that they see the problem and that steps are being taken to protect them. I want to know that any choices I make going forward aren't going to adversely impact people who might be more vulnerable to the harm that's being done than I am. So I'm going to ask around and find out how people are affected by what's going on and make sure that I understand where the boundaries are in terms of what actions might or might not hurt more vulnerable people than myself. Once I've established where those boundaries are, I need to decide whether or not to confront the person who's exercising the abusive behavior. Okay, one of two things is going to happen here. I'm either going to separate myself from this person instantly and completely, or alternatively, I'm going to talk to them and give them the opportunity to fix what's broken. Now, if giving them that opportunity is going to make people vulnerable who can't afford to be vulnerable, then I'm just going to take accountability for that myself and walk away for my own reasons. In other words, if I go and talk to someone about a problem and they're going to want to know how I know about the problem, and if sharing that information is going to throw someone else under the bus who can't be there, you see what I'm saying? I won't do it. I'll just, for my own reasons, walk away from that person and cut ties. So that's one option. I cut ties with the person, I walk away. If I'm going to walk in and, and discuss these issues, there's a very, very strong chance when someone's abusing power in any way, shape, or form that they're going to respond to any identification of that problem as an accusation, right? They're going to immediately see the situation as hostile. So you got to be prepared for that. If you're going to talk to a friend about a real problem, don't assume that person's going to stay your friend all the way through that conversation, because they're probably not going to. They're abusing their privilege in order to achieve their personal goals. They've already rationalized that. Now the question becomes, do they want to reassess that and take a second look, probably while they're in the middle of a production, while they're spending money, and while they're betting hard. They're betting their career, they're betting actual cash and all these other things, that those practices are sustainable and that they're going to pay off. Now is probably not the time when they're going to take a step back and evaluate whether or not it's good, but if you want to try, then try. Have that conversation, identify the problem. You have to take accountability for the observations that you're making yourself if you're going to have this conversation. You have to make it about you and them. If the observations that you're making belong to someone else, and if that person deserves credit for them, don't assume that that person is going to want that credit, right? That goes back to the first conversation. Make sure you understand where those boundaries are in terms of what you can say and do that might jeopardize other people, and you have to maintain those boundaries in the heat of the moment. You can't let your own insecurity about confronting someone else drive you to push blame or accountability onto other people when you're the person who's choosing to have this confrontation. So go right ahead and have that talk, but be ready to be the last line of defense in that conversation. So if you're going to try and help someone, rectify an abuse of power, you need to make yourself accountable. And that oftentimes will mean making yourself a target. And you just have to accept that. And you have to accept that, if there's going to be gaslighting, if there's going to be, bad press about you as a result of what you're doing, you have to assume that the people who buy into that version of the story are going to be people that aren't going to serve your long-term interests and your long-term career. You got to just be the change you want to see and accept that Hollywood is a work in progress, and and insist on those changes. And in the meantime, let your investment in that production be gone for yourself. Don't assume that you're going to try and salvage. Don't assume that you're going to try and salvage the production because for yourself or for the person, you're talking to, because the truth is any effort to do that is going to become an ultimatum. Either you do this or I do this. Well, you don't want to be in that position. You just want them to know that you're not willing to tolerate what they're doing, right? You want that to be a fact and not a threat. So for that to be a fact, you got to let go of the outcome of that conversation. You can't be attached to what happens. You just need to let them know, I don't support you in this. And again, you might not have, there's nobody saying you need to have that conversation. Don't support them in it. Make sure you separate yourself from that environment and that production and those people, and don't be afraid of the fallout of that, okay? And the fallout could be frustrating, it could be bad, and it could be detrimental to your career. What I'm saying is, when I say don't be afraid, I mean don't pretend like there's not going to be negative consequences. I'm just saying accept the negative consequences. Whether I've talked to this person or not, once that process is done, then in order for me to really be finished with what I've seen, I need to audit myself. I need to audit my own practices and see if the abuse that I've witnessed is something I'm doing in my own productions and in my own relationships. This person who I'm having a problem with, inevitably, in some way, is part of my community, right? I've trusted this person on some level, or there wouldn't be an issue. I'd just be pointing the finger at some jerk on Twitter for creating a toxic environment, right? But no, this is someone I am invested in, and it's somebody I've had business with and I've done shows with. This is someone in my show family, even if it's on the distant side. So there's a reason why we have that connection. There's things we have in common. I need to know to what degree that's true. So how do we audit ourselves in a way that is effective, right? Any abuse that someone is undertaking is, on some level, for them, not an ethical issue. On some level, for them, it's a necessity. The reason why they're exploiting people, or the reason why they're being cruel to people, is because on some level, they think they need to do that in order to make the production work. Whether it's financial, even if it's discriminatory in some respect. It's because they're trying to protect themselves in some way. So when we audit ourselves, we have to ask ourselves, when we look at this problem that we're dealing with, what problem is this the solution to? What are people trying to solve by creating this abuse and this extra risk for the production? Making movies is really hard, and it's a process that's conducive to desperation, right? If we identify the problem that an abuser is trying to solve by abusing people, then it becomes much, much easier for us to take a look at our own work, find those same problems, look at how we deal with those problems, and ask ourselves, are we using the same tools? In terms of the long-term sustainability of your career, in terms of the long-term sustainability of Hollywood, this is the most important aspect of dealing with abuse of any kind in this industry, whether we're talking about racism, sexism, whether we're talking about transphobia, whether we're talking about labor abuse, you know, and putting people in situations where, you know, they're working without the resources or the safety equipment that they need to do a good job, or whether we're trying to squeeze people for production value and we're not compensating them enough to make that happen, or whatever the case may be, any kind of abuse at all. In order to eradicate it, we have to create the Hollywood where not doing those things is sustainable. And careers only grow over time. Productions get bigger and bigger and bigger for each of us. So that work is there's no convenient moment for that. There's no convenient moment to pull out the cheap, dirty tricks that we use without thinking about them, you know? But it's gonna be cheaper and less inconvenient today than it will be tomorrow. If we keep doing that work in our own labor, and if we keep investing the time and the effort in our productions to make those abuses unnecessary in the first place, then systemically we start making them obsolete. That's pretty much what I had to say on this A-Sided blog. Thank you very much for watching. If you like what you're getting out of these videos, please make sure to click the thumbs up. Please click subscribe and click the little bell so you get a notification when the next 8-Sided blog becomes available. And thank you very much for watching. Thanks for showing up. Have a great week.